a guy, where is he? Golf course. And he sees what? He sees a big flock of birds. They land, mess around for a while, and then they jump up in the air and they leave. But when they leave, there's so many of them that they look like, ergo the title, a big scarf, a big black napkin or scarf or bandana, you know what I mean, that's out there in the movie. Okay? The end of our poem then, the conclusion of our poem is what? How would you say it? What is the conclusion of the poem? What do you want to qualify as what constitutes the conclusion of this poem? Well, it's kind of two parts, isn't it? Part one is what? What happens at the end of the poem? What happens with the birds? They leave. But what's the second part of the conclusion? And notice the organization here helps us, huh? You see the stanza break? You see a little bit of white space, don't you? Right? And then the last, notice 3 lines. Where the last word is its line unto itself with the word is what? Scarf, right? And he says, long had it been since my heart had been lifted as it was by the lifting of that great scarf. What? His heart? This thing in his chest jumped out of his chest and went jumping through? No. Wait a minute. What does he mean by the word heart? What does that mean, his heart was lifted?
Like his spirit.
Good. His emotions or his spirit. So the conclusion of our poem is kind of 2 parts. 1, the birds took off. 2, how do you want to say it? It affected him how? How? Long had it been since my heart had been lifted, as it was by the lifting of that great scarf. What does it mean to say his heart was lifted? What do you think, Miss Wright? What does that mean to you? His heart was lifted. Let's start with simple 8th grade questions. Is that good or bad that your heart was lifted? Good. Right? Good. But what does it mean, lifted? Tells us something about how he maybe started out his day at the golf course. But by the end of it, whoa. What's the key hinge to go from to whoa? What's the hinge? What is it that takes him from to whoa? What is it that does it? What is it that he sees? In the same way that those birds lifted like a scarf, he says his heart was lifted at the conclusion of his poem. He says, long had it been. I hadn't had a feeling like that in a long time. I've been kind of, what, he says? I've been sad. Now what's fascinating is that at any point in this poem, does he give away any indication that when he started out his day, he was sad? No, not at all. Notice at the beginning of the poem, he says, I was playing golf at Cape Ann, of course, back east, in October. But he says he saw something to remember. By the end of the poem, he says, boy, oh boy, will I remember it. Why will I remember it? Because it was a crummy memory? No. Why? It lifted his heart. It made him see the world differently. That's the conclusion. Okay? Some of you are going, this poem's starting to have a totally different meaning to me. I mean, I read it, but really? Serious? Now all of a sudden I'm like, oh, wait. So he's making a point about the effects of a moment in nature and how it can take you away from where you are, move you to some other place. Not physically. What are we talking about? Right, metaphorically, emotionally, it can move you, can't it? Right? Now, that's the conclusion. But that's not the question. The question of our writing is, how does, and it's listed on the board, organization, diction, and figurative language help who? What's your prompt say? Help the reader prepare for the speaker's concluding response. Looked at this way, the speaker's concluding response is kind of like a surprise. You go, whoa, I thought this was just going to be a dumb poem about a bunch of birds. Well, yeah, it kind of is a dumb poem about a bunch of birds until you get to the very last line. And then you go, oh, he's been having a bummer. We won't say a day, will we? Notice, long had it been. He'd been doing that. What's ironic about that fact, that he's been kind of depressed? Where is he? See, he's not in a computer stall working at minimum wage. No. He's out at a really nice golf course. In other words, we can kind of assume maybe a few things about our speaker. Is he really poor? Does he live under a bridge in New York City? I don't think so. He's wealthy enough, or maybe retired. Good. This could be an older gentleman, right? Who is in the October of his own life. Or her own life. Right? Right? Correct? That's right. The beauty of this poem is that the reader comes to a remarkable surprise at the end. But it's all set up by, first, organization. Notice how he sets up the poem. He begins by saying, there's this thing I saw I could remember. Yeah, it's a bunch of birds. Kind of interesting. Notice, he doesn't begin with birds though, does he? He also messes around with similes. Notice, ripe apples were caught, and you see the word like and you circle it. But notice he isn't messing with birds, he's messing with fish. Have you ever seen a bunch of apples in a tree? It can look like fish caught in a net. What an interesting simile. Maples were colored. Again, but we're not messing with birds. What are maples? What are maples? Yeah, form a tree, right? The maples, notice he says, were colored like apples. Part orange, part red. The elms, already transparent trees, seemed swaying vases full of sky. Interesting, the trees move with the wind like they're holding, like a vase, like they're holding the sky. Well, now that's interesting. That's kind of personification. But notice, no birds. Wait a minute, I thought the title was about birds. Don't worry. You would say, now that you know the poem, we're getting to the birds. We're getting to the birds, right? They're coming. Notice we could go on as if, a comparison using like or as, we call it what? A simile, right? Notice, as if out of the Bible or science fiction, this is what we call an allusion, A-L-L-U-S-I-O-N, when you make a reference to a literary text, right? A cloud appeared. And now for the first time we're going to hear about a flock of starlings, line 21 and following, as much one thing as a rock. In other words, they come in like a big old, notice they're not a scarf. Boom! They land. Later, another simile. As Lot's wife must have done. Do you know this story from the Bible? See, if you don't know the story from the Bible, this isn't going to help you very much. Lot and his wife live in a city called Sodom, right next to another city called Gomorrah. Sodom and sodomy. Sodomy comes from the word Sodom. Sodom is known for its good or its bad traits. Really bad. God in the Bible decides he's had enough of this bad city and he decides to blow it up with fire. But Lot and his wife are saved, but they are told, whatever you do, don't, what? Does anybody know the story? You didn't go to Sunday school to hear this story? Don't look back. Whatever you do, don't look back. Lot and his wife leaving the city. Lot doesn't look back, but we're told his wife, she's curious. She hears all the noises. She hears all the screaming. She wants to look. She turns, she looks. And what happens?
She dies.
You really didn't go to Sunday school. Although, to be fair, this is not always a story taught in Sunday school. She's turned into a block of salt. She's transformed into a block of salt, we're told. Which may be code language for what? Is it good or bad? What would you guess? She's turned into a block of salt is what? Bad. God punishes her for her curiosity. Interestingly, Updike references that story to explain why he's about to do what? He's walking away from where the birds are. And at the last second, he does what? What an interesting reference. Because Lot's wife got jacked for looking back. He isn't going to get jacked. The opposite. He's going to be given a great gift. What will be the gift? His heart. Wow. Notice he says, I lazily looked around. And the rise of the fairway above us was tinted. The gradual rise of green. I had thought nothing in nature could be so broad as grass. More grass, more fairway. And as I watched, one bird, prompted by accident or will to lead, ceased resting, and lifting in a casual billow, the flock ascended as a lady's scarf. Now all of a sudden we're to another simile. Transparent, of gray, might be twitched by one corner, drawn upward, and then decided against. The other, a few years ago, for the first time, I actually got to see this. I had not seen this, probably because I lived places where I just didn't have the opportunity to see it. And I was walking to school, and all of a sudden I looked up and I was like, whoa, there's like something big and black in the sky. And then all of a sudden it turned and it was gone. And then all of a sudden it was back again. I'm like, I must be losing it. This is the product of being an English teacher. You lose your mind. And then all of a sudden it was back again. And as it came closer, I realized it's a scarf of birds. It's a big flock of birds that are moving in the sky, flying together. And when you get several hundred birds together, and they're all black, set against the blue sky, it looks like a black bandana or a scarf. It's kind of remarkable. It's kind of cool to see. Notice, though, for Updike, at the very end of the poem, he's not turned to salt, but his heart is lifted. Whoa, what an interesting poem. The reader is completely set up for this conclusion. You don't see it coming at all, do you? And then at the end of the poem you go, oh, whoa. Notice, of course, at level 3B, this poem can have an effect at a personal level. You can think about a time that you saw something in nature that made you pause. For you, it might not have been a scarf of birds. It might have been a waterfall. It might have been the first time you saw Tinsley Creek and realized, whoa, that's amazing. It might have been the first time that you saw a cloud formation that kind of paused, made you pause, right? And go, whoa, that's amazing, right? See how that works? In other words, at 3B, you can make an observation about how something in nature has affected you and made you have all of a sudden a really happy feeling. And you go, whoa, fascinating. Isn't it funny? It's just words lying on the page, right? It doesn't look like anything, just words, dumb words, and then you read it. Isn't it funny? You can read it and go, it's a poem about birds, big deal. But then notice when you start to really read it at level 2, you go, oh, this is quite a brilliant poem. Updike is doing something quite remarkable, especially if you assume that the speaker of this poem is an old person, right? It's almost as if seeing these birds has resurrected his heart, right? And a lot of old people die from what? Heart attacks, don't they? Right? But he was suffering of another kind of heart attack. We might call it a broken heart. And then all of a sudden, he sees this and he's like, whoa. Now that's worth remembering. Of course, in the modern age, what would probably a student do? Pull out her phone and videotape and then upload to Facefill so that everybody else can see it too, huh? See how that works? We're in a different time. Updike will write a poem about it, right? Today we probably try and videotape it and look at it. Which is better, the videotape or the poem? Well, see, that's a funny question because some of you will say, before I would have probably said the video. But now that we've worked at the poem, I got to admit, it's going to be a long time before I forget this poem. And the next time I see a bunch of birds flying in the air, I'm really going to think about this poem. Interesting thing how poetry works, huh? It can draw word pictures that can bring the reader in. And then it's not so easy to forget a good picture like that. See how that works? Welcome to our class, and welcome to 1020. This is our introduction to literature by beginning with poetry. We'll spend 3 sessions or 4 sessions with poems. Then we'll go to plays and drama. And finally, we'll end with a study of some short stories and a novel. We'll look at Conrad's Heart of Darkness, a little novella. About all of those different genres, though, we'll always be doing the same game. We'll be looking to ask if we can extract or extrapolate information that we can appreciate. Notice, I'm not saying you have to like Updike's poem. I'm saying you have to appreciate it. But the only way you can appreciate it is to understand it. Would you agree with me? My job, hurrah, and even pay me to do this, isn't this cool? Is to help you to learn how to appreciate for yourself. Some of you will maybe go and look and say, Updike, he's quite a writer. I wonder if there's any more of his poems that I can Google for free and read online. Do you think there might be other poems of Updike online for free that you can read? What do you think? Yeah, lots of them. He was a great poet who, are you ready for this? Just passed away last year. He lived a very long life and then passed away. He was a great American, are you ready for this? Novelist. He wrote great novels and short stories. And oh yeah, he threw his hat in as well for a few poems. Isn't that something? His novels and short stories are actually considered greater than his poetry. Isn't that wild? And his essays. He wrote for a famous magazine called The New Yorker, and he was also an editor often for their work. So he had a tremendously gifted life as a writer. The great American poet, John Updike. All right, do you have any questions for me? Are you all groovy with kind of where we're headed then? We all know what we're doing? All right, so